We're almost a week into practice now. Still questions abound. We're going to look at them today.
You are Locked On Boston College, your daily podcast on the Boston College Eagles. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Locked On Boston College, your team every day. I'm your host, AJ Black. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. It's football season when we have Eagle insider writer Mitch Wolfe on here today, and he has a lot to talk about. He's going to be heading to practice, his first practice on Friday, and we're going to talk about some of the questions he has about the Eagles. Only a week in the camp, but we have some really interesting things you're going to want to hear about all three segments today. Mitch, how's it going?
It's going well. It's been a while since I've been on. I've been deep in the process of previewing BC's opponents, reviewing their stats and watching their film. But now we finally get the chance to talk more about BC football now that they're back at training camp or whatever you want to call it, which is exciting. It's obviously a new era, lots of excitement around the team, at least in the BC media space. So yeah, it's going to be fun to talk about and be there at practice for the first time.
I know, and I don't think Adazio never had open practice, did he? I think he had closed practice too.
Couldn't tell you. I was busy in class during that time.
Okay, so yeah, I know. Well, we had Halfley who had closed practice. Now Bill O'Brien has it open, and you're going to get a chance to see practice under a new head coach with a lot of new staff members. What are some things under Bill O'Brien that you're looking for from a general perspective or from a coaching perspective?
I think my first thing with the coaching is kind of just how the structure of play calling and philosophy gets distilled down to the players and obviously I haven't been to practice, but what I kind of glean, O'Brien is kind of making his way around the practice, to everything as people kind of work individually or in groups. So I kind of want to see, how are the new coordinators taking charge? What are they delegating to the other position coaches? So what is Will Lawing, the new OC? How is he the one actually calling the plays? Is it O'Brien? How does that work? And then similarly on defense, is Tim Lewis calling the plays? How does that work? Distilling that down through guys like Dan O'Brien, Jeff Commissiong, Ray Brown, who are basically an entirely new defensive coaching staff. So that's probably the biggest thing that I'm trying to see. And obviously, I haven't been to a BC practice before, so I don't have anything to go off besides what you've told me about practices in the past and practices, since you've been able to go during this short tenure of Bill O'Brien. And then obviously, this is something that got talked about a lot earlier in camp, but it'll be interesting to see if O'Brien has any teapot moments, because from what you've told me, there were a few in the first few days, which is interesting.
Yeah, he's a intense guy. And I said before, like this is not a Bill O'Brien is like an ogre type of thing. Like I was talking to the Louisville guy, and he's like, "Yeah, I get to go to practice," and Jeff Braun blows his gasket all the time too. And so this is the style you're gonna see it, And I had to say, the last practice I went to, he didn't have any of those moments. He was pretty calm through the whole thing. But he is all over everything. He's out there coaching all over the field, whether it's the offense and defense. Is there anything from like a general standpoint, like just the way the team is set up, that you're looking for?
I think it'll be interesting to see. You've talked a lot about how much more physical this camp is, and how Craig Fitzgerald, the new strength and conditioning coach, or quote unquote director of football performance, as he's known on the website, how he has kind of instilled this new attitude with this team in terms of being more physical and everything. So I'm interested to see how that takes place in practice, because obviously that was something that I would say Jeff Halfley de-emphasized for the purposes of preventing injury during practice, which, I can respect that tactic. So that'll be something interesting to look at. Kind of want to see which guys in the roster are kind of taking charge as leaders, because, obviously with the defensive coaching staff, it's completely new. The offensive coaching staff is mostly the same. The guys that are new have been here for a little bit, or they're O'Brien guys. So I'm interested to see, kind of who is standing out as the vocal leaders on either side of the ball. You kind of expect Thomas Castellanos to be one of them. Who's kind of then who on the offensive line is being the leader, who is kind of being that guy among the receivers, running backs, what have you. And then obviously on defense, you've got a few veteran guys there. You got a guy like Cam Arnold, Donovan Ezaraku. But I'll be interested to see like who is also stepping up, mainly in the secondary, where so much change is happening in terms of who's getting the playing time and who's going to be making the starts.
It's such a difference, and you're gonna get to see this, and it's not gonna spoil anything. But I wrote about it on Eagle Insider. The difference between because when Halfley had practices closed, you could at least still see like how the practice would end. Like they would be doing 11 versus 11, or simulated different scenarios on the field, and you could watch them from very far away, knowing that that's what they were doing. And they would end from that, do a few special teams things, and go right into the huddle and talk to Halfley as a team. That's how it ends. The biggest difference with this is that's not how it ends with O'Brien. They do the situational stuff at the end and then go straight to running wind sprints, doing suicide, and Fitzgerald is all over them. And so, as someone who is not in football shape, I'm watching this going, my God, I would be throwing up all over the place if I was those guys. They just did 2 hours worth of football work, and now they have to do this to end. It's a lot, but you know what? It's instilling a toughness in the team. And I think that is what he's been known for. As O'Brien called him the best strength and conditioning coach in the country. He's been having his choice of jobs. He could have gone to Florida. He's been a lot of fun to watch as well. So that's the first part. Now we're gonna get more specific. I want to give some more time for the next two segments. So we're gonna step away for a second because I want to talk about the offense with Mitch next. Thomas Castellanos, he's gonna get a chance to watch the quarterbacks, and I want to let him talk to you a little bit about what questions he has about the offense coming up next. Game Time is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down the closer it gets to the first pitch, with killer last minute deals, all in prices viewed from your seat and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Maybe you want to go see your team on the road and you don't know how the setup of the stadium you're going to is going to look. You can see where your tickets are going to be. And that way, you're not going to get surprised if you end up at Coors Field and you end up, you know, 3 miles back because you didn't know where your seats were going to be. You can go and pick your seats out, know exactly the way you're going to see the game, and that is a killer option under game time. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Thank you all who have made Locked On Boston College your first listen of the day. You guys have made this podcast what it is now. Now, if you need a second listen, check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, who gets you ready for an exciting season on the gridiron with discussion of the upcoming season and the ever-changing landscape of college athletics, including conference realignment, the transfer portal, NIL, new college football, expanded playoffs, and more. Locked On College Football is available on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. Your team every day. All right, Mitch, let's look at the offense. Thomas Castellanos, this is his first season on the offensive side of the ball as the starter from day one. What are you looking for out of him and out of this offense?
I think the overarching theme of what I'm going to be looking for with the offense is confirming my priors, and I would say my biggest one is the issue that we've talked about is the quote unquote quarterback controversy, which involves the backup Grayson James, who transferred in from FIU in the offseason, having some very good moments. I think we are a little more skeptical of that because most of them come against backups. And going back to the spring game, watching that, it felt like they had Castellanos on a quicker leash or a quicker timer in terms of what's a sack, how quickly do you need to get rid of the ball. And James had a bit longer of a leash where they let him scramble a bit, let him kind of do whatever he needed to get the ball forward. And a lot of his passes were checked down. So I'm kind of interested to see how does that carry over to practice? Is it the same way? And that kind of leads into my second point, which is how and this is obviously just going to be a practice, so it's not going to be, this question is not going to be fully answered, but how is this offense being tailored to either fit with Thomas Castellanos' strengths or be the quote unquote Bill O'Brien offense, which based on my research, Bill O'Brien is pretty flexible with kind of what he wants to do on his offense based on his quarterback and the skill positions he has around him. With that being said, Bill O'Brien has not been one to use some of the offensive stuff that BC used last year, where they would bring on, 7 offensive linemen, 2 tight ends, and just run quarterback power. That's not really his offense, even with good mobile quarterbacks like Bryce Young and Deshaun Watson. So are we going to see stuff like that? Is it just going to be this true drop back game where, they're going in empty and there's all these option routes and what have you? Or and if not, if it's not of those, what's the balance between those two kind of schools of thought? I'm sure there is going to be a balance between the two, but I kind of want to see how that takes shape. The other question I have in terms of confirming my priors is, what does the running back position look like? Because going into the offseason, I was pretty bullish on Kai Robichaux being the starter. I was like, okay, this guy's a physical back. He's a decent receiver, good pass protector, so he can kind of do it all. He's not super explosive, but he is reliable. And now I've kind of flipped to the point where I think Trayshawn Ward, the transfer from Kansas State via Florida State, is a much better fit for what Bill O'Brien has wanted in his offense for most of his career, coming from the New England system where you have backs that are very good receivers out of the backfield, which is something Ward can do. And then what they would essentially do is use Robichaux as the late game hammer, where when defenses are tired from playing the whole game, you bring in a big bruising back like Robichaux, where he can take advantage of a more tired defense. And that way you also keep both of these backs fresh, because Robichaux struggled a little bit with injury down the stretch. And obviously he and Castellanos were like the whole offense, just running the ball all the time. So you're probably not going to see that as much, but you want to keep them both healthier later in the season, especially with Alex Broom's status kind of up in the air. You have backups like Jordan McDonald, who is kind of a Robichaux clone. You have Datrell Jones, who is a redshirt freshman, but hasn't played at all. So the depth there is a little questionable. I'm not super worried as long as nobody else suffers a long-term injury, but I'm interested to see how that goes. In terms of the receivers, I think my guess question is basically like, how are they using Lewis Bond in terms of as an outside receiver, slot receiver? Because he's done both a good bit. I think he's equally effective in both, but then it's kind of a matter of who do you want as the third receiver in 11 personnel? Do you want Jaden McGowan, who's pretty much always going to be in the slot, or do you want Jaden Skeet, who's more of an outside receiver? I imagine Dino Tomlin is probably not really competing for a starting job. He's always kind of just been more of a fourth receiver, the guy that if somebody is dinged up, you can bring him and he can play anywhere, but he's not going to be your main receiving threat. I think he might be muted.
Sure was. I've had an allergy, so I was coughing, so I tried to mute myself.
Mm-hmm.
Anyone in terms of the skill positions that you're excited to, like one specific player that you're like really excited to watch?
I'm interested about Reed Harris because his physical growth is very interesting to me, because last year he was listed at like 6'3", 199, so basically the same size as Joseph Griffin. Now he's listed at 6'5", 229. Now, take all measurements with a grain of salt. Teams lie about this kind of stuff all the time. We saw them bump Thomas Castellanos down from 5'10" to 5'9". I would argue that might be even still be generous. They somehow bumped Quintavious Hutchins up from 6'1" to 6'3". I don't think that happens when you're 21 or 22 years old. So, but I'm interested to see like how does he look? How are they using him? Is the long-term plan for him to switch to tight end? Because that would make sense, given kind of what they need with the roster right now. In terms of the offensive line, because I know a lot of people were concerned about that, I'm not super worried about that for this year, just because I think they have enough depth guys that even if Logan Taylor is being brought along slowly due to an offseason injury, you have got, and I know they're not world beaters, but you have guys like Dwayne Alec, Otto Hess, and Kevin Klein who at least have played a decent bit and they're not being completely thrown into the fire. So I'll be interested to see, like, I'm not super worried about the offensive line in terms of seeing what they're going to do in practice. I'm also a little skeptical of how much you can learn about offensive line in practice, because a lot of the drills are not full speed. They're not full 100% contact. So that's, kind of takes away from what you can learn of the offensive line. So I would say I'm definitely more interested in the skill positions and kind of just the general offensive schematic atmosphere of who's doing what and what are the major influences of what the offense is going to look like this year.
I really hope that Bill O'Brien at some points does some practicing in alumni, because standing on the sideline or, if you're out on the field, you stand basically in the end zone to watch it.
Yeah.
If you're in the fish field house, you have to stand on a sideline. It's almost impossible to see what's going on with an offensive line at that point. It's just like
that too.
It's like because you're basically at ground level with them. All you can see is just a massive humanity. You can't see, like when you're above it, you can easily see if mistakes are made, but like when you're there, it's just hard.
And even then, offensive line play, you typically need to rewatch it back a few times to capture everything that's going on and see if there were multiple mistakes or if it's just one thing or did everybody do their job right or whatever. You need to usually watch back a few times from, like you said, an elevated angle. So yeah, again, I don't think you can unless there's things really going wrong. I don't think you're going to glean much from watching the offensive line in practice.
Are you interested in watching like I know you dive into to specifics, but like Thomas Castellano's footwork. That was something that as someone who just kind of likes it and likes football, I can see it. But I'm wondering what you're going to be. Are you going to be looking at things like that?
Yeah, I would definitely take a look at that. I think, and that's something where I think I would watch it in practice, and I'd want to go back to last year and compare it to see where the differences. Find similar plays, similar dropbacks where you say, okay, how are his feet different from last year when he was kind of in a very different offensive scheme to this year, where that has been essentially has been really important in terms of them drilling that to make sure your feet are in the right place. So yeah, I think that's something I'll track a little bit of and then go back and review it compared to last year, because I think that's something where he can really progress to be more consistent as a short yardage thrower, because there were sometimes where he would just sail short throws for no reason. And I think that's tied to footwork. So if he can kind of hone that in and become, very reliable and just quick short passes that can keep the offense ahead of the chains, that could be huge for this offense as a whole.
Any other last thoughts on the offense before we get into our last segment?
Let me take a look at the roster and depth chart. We got to keep an eye on Luke McLaughlin.
Yep. Yep.
Well, that's all I got for him.
Okay. While Mitch is looking that up, I want to tell you guys about our subtext Locked On Boston College Eagles Nest program. It's a text-based program where you can talk to me directly, and it's not a group chat. It's just to me. If you have questions, if you have comments, if you want to just chat BC with me, it's free for the entire football season. For the first 30 people, we have about 5 more spots available. Sign up now. I'm sending videos. If you want to see me, I will wave to you. I am doing all sorts of stuff on campus. Check it out. Get in now. The description and the promo codes in the notes. Sign up today. All right, Mitch, any last thoughts?
For offense, no. If we want to move on defense, we can do that. But
all right, give us 1 second and we'll get right back to it. We'll be back in just a moment. This is Locked On Boston College, AJ Black. If you enjoy our show, let me tell you about Locked On ACC, hosted by Alex Dono and Kenton Gibbs. Kenton Gibbs, former NC State defensive tackle. I used to do shows with him. He's amazing. You need to check it out. It's on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And again, I was telling you about the subtext. Join it. It is awesome. It's totally obligation free. If you're a BC fan and you want to get even more BC information, click on that link in the promo in the show notes right now. All right, Mitch, let's wrap this thing up. Let's talk about the defense. I think the biggest question mark going into the season is everything about this defense. What are you going to be looking for?
I think just looking at the secondary, pretty much outside of Amari Jackson, who's pretty much the only, I would say, surefire starter BC has right now. I would say the other 5 positions, assuming BC is going to be a nickel primary defense, the other 5 positions are pretty much all up for grabs. You've got probably Ryan Turner, Breakweast Brown, and Max Tucker competing for the corner spot opposite Jackson. Turner, Cam Martinez, Kari Johnson competing for the slot position. KB Price and Cole Batson at one safety spot, Bug Jones and Jalen Cheek at the other. I'm just interested to see like who's performing well. And I'm sure it changes on a day-to-day basis. So you got to make sure not to take too much away from just one day of practice. And kind of want to see what they're being asked to do, because obviously this is going to be a different defense. I think there are certain through lines that are going to be similar to what Jeff Hafley was doing. But still interested to see what's going to be different in secondary, because obviously I'm also interested to see Ray Brown, because he's been a star kind of on social media during this recruiting off season. I know he's been kind of highlighted as an up and comer in the coaching scene, so I'll be interested to just kind of see his coaching style up close and personal. Especially when the other 2 guys that kind of have these connections to BC. Dan O'Brien, his dad, coached here. Jeff Commission coached here a long time ago and coached some really good players here. But Ray Brown is kind of like the outlier here. So I'm interested to see kind of what his coaching style is like on the field.
Yeah, he's a lot of fun to watch. He's one of the most high energy.
Most secondary coaches are, I've found. So that's definitely, that's kind of why I highlighted him.
Yeah, and he's right there with the guys and coaching them up and stuff. But yeah, he's a personality on that field. And he's probably listening to this. So hey, Ray, he usually comments if I ever comment about it on the show. But anyways, what about some of the players that are coming back? Guys like Neto Ekpala, Donovan Azaraku, Cam Arnold, Cam Horsley, which same with the offensive line. It's tough to see what he does unless he's barreling into the backfield. What are you looking for some of the older returning starters?
I think I'm interested to see how communication works there because, again, this is a new defense. You lose a guy like Vinny De Palma, who was really like the brains of the operation for so many years. You know, he's the guy who's been around forever. He knows everything. So how is Cam Arnold taking over that role? You know, what role is Bryce Steele playing? How's a guy like David Crouch doing? David Crouch is a junior at this point, so he's been around for a decent bit too. So kind of interesting, like who's taking over that communication role? Is it some of the safeties? Are they helping with that? And then with the defensive line, I'm definitely more interested, honestly, in the depth there because that's something that we've both been concerned about in terms of behind Don Nezaraku and Nito Akpala is almost kind of part of it. But if either of those two guys go down, you know, then BC is in really dire straits at the edge position. So how are guys like Edwin Kalengi, Gilbert Tungrangu, Josiah Griffin, Quintavious Hutchins, Clive Wilson, and even a guy like Ty Clemens, if he's available, you know, how are those guys performing? Kind of, again, what roles are they in? Are we going to see changes to that? Because, you know, you have guys that are a lot smaller, like Hutchins and Griffin. You have kind of a long, lanky type like Wilson. You have a tweener like Clemens. How are those guys being used in terms of what alignment or technique are they taking? How many of them are reducing inside on passing downs? Are we going to see that from BC? Because we didn't see that a ton. They pretty much kept guys like Cam Horsley and George Rooks out there on the vast majority of snaps. So are we going to see more of that? Are we going to see different fronts? Because BC for pretty much the entire Jeff Hafley tenure was a almost exclusively even front defense, meaning they have 4 down defensive linemen. And that's what's with an asterisk because sometimes they would stand up one edge rusher. But, you know, they're very locked into a certain type of front. Are we going to see that change a little bit? Are we going to see more of the defensive linemen two gap in terms of are they going to be reading the offensive lineman and not just trying to shoot through the gap to make a play? So I don't anticipate like a huge defensive change as much as I did earlier in the spring. But I'll be interested to see kind of who is stepping up and taking over leadership roles in this defense, especially in the front 7.
All right. Any last thoughts, Mitch, before you head out?
I'm not sure how much I'll be able to get to see of it, but I am going to try to spend a decent amount of time checking out snapping and punting because that is a big question mark for me going into the season because right now the only returning long snapper on the roster is a guy who's a former walk-on when he was on the swim team before. They got a transfer in from he has 2 colleges listed. One of them is like Emory and Henry College and Old Dominion is the other one, but he hasn't played at all from what I can tell. So I'll be interested to see how that's going. The punting situation is concerning to me because Sam Kandati is a very good accuracy and placement punter, doesn't have a lot of leg. So do we see a guy like, I believe his name is Ivan Zavenko, who transferred from Bryant? He's 6'5", almost 200 pounds. So more of that modern build of punter where they're a lot longer, so they have longer levers to kick the ball farther. Do we see him take over some more of the punting? So, you know, that's something that, you know, if that's a problem for BC, it could doom the season kind of the way it did with the extra points and field goals in 2014. So I'm interested to see how that's going. It's not something a lot of people, granted, I feel like I know a decent amount of football. I really don't know a lot about like the techniques and the nuances of snapping and punting, but I'll be interested to watch that and see, okay, how is this going? Is this going to be a major problem for BC in 2024, which I hope it isn't. But I still think it's a major question mark for this team as a whole.
All right. I can't wait to hear what you have to say. We'll have to have you back on early next week to talk about when you get back about what you saw. Mitch, where can people find you and find your work?
You can find me at Mitchell T. Wolfe, WOLFE on Twitter. You can find my work at Eagle Insider, obviously. We're almost done with the opponent previews. We have the one for Missouri coming out at the end of this week. The one from Michigan State got published earlier this week with a lot of information about their defense. Missouri's is really interesting. They've got a really good team, a lot of interesting players to check out. And then only 2 more before the season's here. And then we're pretty much there. You know, I think by the time the Florida State one comes out, we'll be in week 0 and they'll be getting ready to play in Ireland against Georgia Tech. So football season's just around the corner, and I'm super, super, super excited.
All right, Mitch. Thank you so much for coming on. This is AJ Black. Follow us on Twitter at Locked On BC, me on Twitter at AJ Black247, and again over on Eagle Insider. Join the Eagles Nest. I hope to see you guys all there. We'll be back again tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Boston College, your team every day.